Welcome to the Hertie School and to the Henrik Enderlein Forum for tonight's event on Iran. When we wrote the title Iran on the Brink, the war had not yet started. I don't know if Brink is still adequate as a title, but certainly it is a moment of complete crisis and reversal. When Ali and I started talking that we should do something, our thinking was that it's important to speak about the heartbreak that all Iranians have been living since December and the difficulties for the region internally already, and of course the geopolitical importance, and that's our goal for today. So let me get started by officially welcoming Ali Fathollah-Nejad, PhD, I'll get to that afterwards, who is a German-Iranian political scientist and author, working at the intersection of Middle Eastern politics, international relations and security, and development studies. And he is both, I'm very proud to say, a fellow here at the Hertie School, has been an instructor. Maybe you've had his classes. And he's also the founder and director of the Center for Middle East and Global Order, CMEG. And I'll start by asking him the first question to tell us a little bit more about that after I present you, because I think it's interesting for people in the room to know more if they'd like to get engaged. Ali is a scholar, a doctor who holds a PhD in international relations from the Department of Development Studies at the School of Oriental and African Studies, SOAS, at the University of London, and has been a postdoctoral fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School. He has taught, among others, in universities in London, Berlin, Doha, Tübingen, and Prague, and is the author of hundreds of articles in English, German, and French, and with translations in more than a dozen other languages. I'm very proud that we have him here because everybody else only sees him on television these days, because I think I've asked him if he actually sleeps. He is one of the most sought-after commentators, has been explained Germany's foremost Iran explainer, and has certainly been very busy trying to make sense of current events on all these different channels and stations. He's also been a former Iran expert of the Brookings Institution in Doha, the German Council on Foreign Relations, and the American University of Beirut's Issam Fares Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs, as well as the 2022 McCloy Fellow on Global Trends of the American Council on Germany. So these are the academic credentials, but I also like to talk about the extremely prolific writing you've produced in the last only 5 years in my list. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 monographs. The last one, the latest ones I'll mention last, because we have copies here in the room. Iran, wie der Westen seine Werte und Interessen verrät. But I'd also like to highlight his 2023 book, The Islamic Republic in Existential Crisis. The 2021, Iran in an Emerging New World Order, from Ahmadinejad, this will happen to me a lot this evening, to Rouhani. The 2020, The Politics of Culture in Times of Rapprochement, European Cultural and Academic Exchange with Iran. And the 2020, The Islamic Republic of Iran in 4 Decades On, which is a book that I think we'll hear a little bit about, where he suggested that back then, so 6 years ago, he saw the start of a very long-term revolutionary process in Iran that certainly we all see today as well. Let me stop and speak a little bit about the latest publication in German, the 2025 book that you have in the back of the room, Iran, How the West is, what's the translation? Betraying, thank you, its values and its interests, which provides an analysis of the internal ruptures and the international challenges created by the Islamic Republic of Iran, which describes in detail the coalition course between state and society that Ali felt was going to explode, and analyzes the revolutionary processes which led to the massacres that started in the latest revolutionary process from December to January and onwards, and now the war in Iran that I'm sure you all have heard a lot about in the headlines. You are providing a blueprint also to policymakers on how to have a better Iran policy that actually combines what is the support that I think we all want to provide to the society in Iran suffering from the repression of the Islamic Republic, but also something that is mindful of the geopolitical, economic, and security interests that the Iranian regime affects. So I very much encourage you to look at the table and reach out for the book. You can buy it here on your way out, 22 euros. If you have them on you, and the opportunity, I hope I have the right price, to get a signature by the author if you stick around. So Ali will be in the back. Please know that the book has been crowned one of the 10 best books of 2025 by the Tagesspiegel. And it is a very appealing plea for nuances in the way we think about the Middle East. And I think that is an important thing to contribute. So I have many questions for you. I will only ask 3 in the discussion prior, and then we want to open the room and give you the opportunity to discuss. But before I ask you anything substantial, can you please tell us more about the Center for Middle East and Global Order that you direct?
Good evening. First of all, I'm very delighted to be here. Thank you, Cornelia, for setting this up. Thank you to the Hertie School for hosting us. This event is in fact co-organized by CMEG, which is the Center for Middle East and Global Order. It's actually a voluntary-based organization, and we run it since 3 years now without a single cent, actually. And so basically, as you've heard, I've been working in different think tanks, and I got got quite frustrated because of the political bias of the field. So I decided to, set up my own think tank or research network with a lot of scholars from various parts of the Middle East. We have a core team which is, primarily Iranian. And my ambition was to seek people who are very, very top class, in their respective fields, but who still have a moral compass. And this is, the kind of background. And we've been, able to, actually without one single cent, we've been able to, have much publicity, and we have a lot of, our scholars are, interviewed a lot. We have publications. So, please feel free to check our website, which is cmeg.org, and you can also join us. So that's the brief version of it.
Yes, and thank you very much for providing this, because we certainly need more expertise. But now we have you, and that's why I would like you to first get us all a little bit on the same level. I have looked around across the room, and I'm pretty sure there are experts here who know more about most questions than certainly myself, maybe not Ali, but some of you know the region very well. And others may just come because they figured this is important and they'd like to know more. So could you get us started on the arc that moved from all the different protest movements we've seen in Iran over the years up to the very latest one, to the massacre that has happened in January and onward, to the war we see today? What exactly does one need to know to understand that arc?
Perhaps just as a continuation to what I said earlier, there is a Hertie student who's also part of our team. Isabella was here. We have our assistant director as well here. And the purpose of CMEG is to look into the epochal transformations that we're seeing both on the geopolitical level, but also within the region with the popular uprising starting with the Arab Spring. So this is what we are particularly looking at. And talking about the latter, which is the popular uprisings, I had the great fortune to have a wonderful PhD supervisor at SOAS, Gilbert Ashkar. Perhaps some of you know his works. He's one of the leading Arab intellectuals. He's been writing the 2 most important books on the Arab Spring, which he conceptualized as a long-term revolutionary process. And as I was his tutor, I realized that there are a lot of parallels between the Arab Spring countries and Iran, despite the claim of some kind of Iranian exceptionalism that, for instance, Iranians are not seeking revolution, they are merely looking for reform because of the trauma of 1979. But I realized that, structurally speaking, both politically and socioeconomically, there are a lot of overlaps in terms of socioeconomic indicators. You will see in both cases, both in Arab Spring countries and also in the Iranian case, quite high rates of youth unemployment and women underemployment. You have a political economy that is quite exclusive, that is very much monopolized by the same elite that is monopolizing economic and political power. And structurally speaking, the Middle East is the world region, in comparison to other world regions, that has the highest density of autocratic systems. And obviously, autocratic systems, by definition, do not really allow you, paths of reform. So this is why there have been always those eruptions of popular anger, be it in two waves of the Arab uprising at the turn of the year 2010 to 2011, and then the second wave, which is in 2018-19, in those countries that have not been affected by the first wave. In Iran, I figured, looking at the uprising that we had 8 years ago, which is at the turn of the year 2017-18, the so-called day protests, that something dramatic happened. First of all, for the first time ever, the social base of this uprising was the lower classes. The lower classes were hitherto considered to be a loyal social base of the regime. But back then, they took to the streets en masse, triggered by the socioeconomic question because of rising prices and so forth. And those protests immediately got political, and people started chanting slogans against the entirety of the Islamic Republic, that is both against the military component, which is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, and the political component, which is the clerical component, sorry, which is the Shia clergy that is running the country. And for the first time, they've been chanting slogans against both main factions of the political establishment, not only against the hardliners, but also against the so-called reformists. Those reformers have been considered for quite some time, mostly in the 1990s in Iran itself, but nevertheless, up until very recently in Europe, as potential, actors of change from above, right? But because of various, circumstances and developments, and also structural deficits within the reformist faction of the Iranian elite, they have been discredited by the bulk of the Iranian population, and which started to conceive them as part of the problem and not part of the solution. And for me, this particular instance, both, in the Arabs' case, one would say kullan yani kullan, so, this rejection of the entire elite, and secondly, the social base, the lower classes, took me to argue that what we are witnessing in Iran is the start of a long-term revolutionary process. We had a de facto, continuation of that uprising in November of 2019 in the wake of an overnight tripling of fuel prices, which then saw Iranians taken to the streets. The regime then cut off the internet. And within a matter of half a week, they killed, probably 1,500 people. This time around, the number was 200,000 in comparison to 50,000 who had taken to the streets of around 100 cities and towns in all corners of Iran. So the geographical spread also, in comparison to earlier uprisings, was much more broader in those two protest waves. And then again, there was harsh repression. And the protest wave stopped after 2 or so weeks. And then we had the erstwhile culmination of that process in the autumn of 22. You all remember the Women Life Freedom uprising, Zan Zindagi Azadi, or Jinjian Azadi, sorry, thank you. Which was the erstwhile culmination. This time around, the trigger was not socioeconomic, but it was this, sociocultural. It was the hijab issue. The young Kurdish Iranian woman, Jina Mahsa Amini, who died in state custody because of bad hijab, right? So, and this triggered a nationwide uprising that engulfed around 150 cities. And which, according to estimates, involved the participation of around 2 to 3 million Iranians out of a population that is quite similar than the one of this country. And the regime was, had quite problems in putting it down because it was only put down after 3.5 months. But it was put down because there was what we call in Persian, in social scientific terms, the gray social class. So those are the people who do sympathize with the revolutionary uprising, but they don't take to the streets, right? Because of various reasons, because of maybe they have something to lose, or they don't believe in what will come after, right? Both politically and economically. So all of that you're going to find in more detail in the book and in some other publications. And then we had this uprising, which started on December 28th, triggered again by the social question and by the economic downturn in Iran. And this uprising actually turned out to be the biggest in the history of the Islamic Republic, that is since 1979, with the participation of millions of Iranians. We don't have an exact figure yet, but we have had protests in 400 cities, in thousands of locations. We had, so that is the spread, which was much larger this time. It was triggered in the bazaar. The bazaar was, again, also considered, that the lower class was considered to be a social base, a loyal social base of the regime. And this turned out not to be the case, because also the bazaris were very much frustrated about the political elite and its economic policies. And then it spread to students. Students have always been, a hotbed of dissent in Iran. With every, during all those uprisings that I mentioned, in 150 universities, there have been protests against the regime, and this time around as well. And by January 8th, 9th, we had a climax, which saw hundreds of thousands of Iranians taking to the main streets in all large cities of the country. And the regime panicked. They not only shut down the internet, which they did in November 2019, but this time around they shut down the mobile phone network and also the landline network, right? So in digital darkness, they committed probably the most important massacre in modern times. There have been reports by Time magazine relying on Iranian health ministry figures saying that in the span of 2 days, 30,000 people were killed. According to my own information, that is medical personnel in Iran itself, they estimate goes much higher, 80,000. Whatever the number is, it's one of the huge massacres on the planet. Time magazine looked up, data, the databases, and they found out that only the Nazis during the World War II in Kiev were perpetrating a similar scale of violence against, killing 30,000 people within that short span of time. I want to spare you all the brutalities and the atrocities. People were shot, but they were not able to go to the hospital because the security forces would enter the hospital and kill the people. Security forces were paid for every injured and were paid even more for every killed. They were importing militias, thousands of them, from Afghanistan, from Iraq, the kind of militias that we were setting up to fight the revolution against Bashar al-Assad in Syria. And yeah, so, I've been working on this region for a very long time, and this region is, ripe with political violence. I don't have to tell you. Gaza, Iran, and, and all the rest, right? But I never saw such a scale of violence within such a short period of time. And yeah, they basically were able to brutally suppress it. And here we are.
And this is chilling enough, but bring us one step further, because we also have a war now. And
exactly.
And I'll even say the naive way, many people have watched and had their hearts broken to see the massacre and hope that maybe the external intervention could help.
Yeah. And I mean, if you have to understand the context against which many Iranians were hoping for outside intervention. Even the 2003 Nobel Peace Prize laureate Shirin Ebadi, even Nasrin Sotoudeh, who is also a very prominent Iranian human rights lawyer who is jailed, the recipient of the Zakharov Prize of the European Parliament. They've been both calling for some kind of a humanitarian intervention, right? Because you have to understand that we have entered a specific period where this regime is acting as an occupational power against its own society. And people were actually taking to the streets with bare hands and very courageous. If I, explain you in detail what especially the young people in Iran did, it's heartbreaking. So it is against this context, against this backdrop, that people were hoping some kind of a war of liberation. And then, because of various reasons that pertain to the field of security policy and foreign policy, and which we can delve into, during the Q&A if you like, we had the start of this war on February 28th. So we are now in the second week of this war. And from all the indications that I have, I don't think that this is going to end well. I think one of the main reasons is that the United States doesn't have a strategy. Trump is saying, every 2 hours he's saying different stuff, right? It's totally, and then more recently, he's looking at a kind of Venezuela-style scenario in Iran. He's drunk with the kind of success that he had in Venezuela. He hopes to implement the same scenario on Iran, on the Islamic Republic, which in my estimation is not going to work because it's a different political system. It's an ideological system. In the Venezuelan case, Trump had connections to important figures within the Venezuelan regime. It's not the case in Iran. So he was hoping that after the initial strike of decapitation that happened at the outset of this war, killing the supreme leader Ali Khamenei, he would find someone within the regime who would be willing to, to have a deal with, right, and to arrange some kind of accommodation with the United States. So this is one problem. There is no political strategy here. The second problem is that, and this is the more general problem, and the Israelis are perhaps also looking at some other things. Most notably, I mean, the common denominator between the two is a degradation of the military and power projection capabilities of the Islamic Republic, hence the heavy bombardment of the military infrastructure, right? So this is what they both agree upon, right? But then again, the Israelis may be happy with some kind of a state collapse, hence the kinds of bombings they have done mostly in Tehran, but not only Tehran, this past weekend, striking 30 oil depots. I don't know if you have seen the footage from Tehran, it's like Armageddon. In the wake of those oil depot strikes, there have been oil and chemical saturated rain coming down. The city was black for half a day or more. People coughing and all kinds of, health issues. So the Israelis are, it's not even clear what they have in mind, beyond that aim of degradation. They may be, satisfied with a kind of weakened Iran, in disarray, and even starting to target the also kind of non-military sites. I mean, one could argue it's a dual use. Okay, it is dual use, but both airports and energy infrastructure. But this is not, this is not according to international law, for sure. Thirdly, we have the Iranian regime side, okay, that is perpetrating a kind of lashing out against all neighbors, shooting hundreds of missiles onto GCC countries, onto Israel, with the aim and with the strategy to push the GCC countries so that it can push Trump to end the war, because the Islamic Republic finds itself in an existential war. And also the kinds of attacks that we have against the energy infrastructure in Saudi Arabia and Qatar, today in Bahrain, right? With a kind of de facto closure of the Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% of the world's LNG and oil goes through. So it has created havoc in the world economy. And I think, and we can talk about the future maybe later on, but the bottom line here, and to find to say the last sentence here, there have been a lot of hopes, and many Iranians still have hopes. Many Iranians inside of Iran still have the hope that the war going to bring an end to the regime despite all the costs associated with it. See the level of desperation, right? Because they fear if the regime going to be at place after the war ends, the regime going to commit an even larger massacre against them, right? So it's a very, very tricky situation. But the bottom line is that there is no overlap, there is no parallelism between geopolitical/imperial interests and the Iranian society's interest to get rid of this domestic occupational power.
You ended on a bleaker term than I had hoped, because I wanted to look a little bit in the future. So let me maybe just ask you for more detailed analysis of what you think makes up the resilience of the Islamic Republic, or maybe explain to us how fragile the regime is, because you have said quite a number of times it is in a very fragile state. It is fighting an existential war, but you still think it's not gonna go all the way to the ground. At least that's how I heard your pessimism here at the end. So what creates that resilience that makes you say that? And what is, to you, the reading we should have of the nomination of a new supreme leader, of the, what's the word, the renovation of its leadership, and the way in which it resists the current challenges?
I mean, there are two issues. One issue is the whole academic and debate that we've seen over the past few decades when it comes to the idea of authoritarian resilience. And I've been one of the ones who have been arguing against this kind of argument, in the Iranian case at least, because, I mean, you know, because Western foreign policy vis-a-vis the entire region, including Iran, was predicated upon the paradigm of authoritarian stability, the idea that authoritarian regimes can provide for the kind of stability that we want, the West wants, right? And then there were, you know, so this was also predicated upon the assumption that there is a kind of authoritarian resilience, that authoritarian structures in the Middle East are resilient. But people often confuse resilience with permanence, okay? Resilience is not permanence. There is, and I've been arguing that politically and socioeconomically speaking, politically, you know, because of the wide gulf between state and society, socioeconomically, because of the huge problems, you know, with bulk of the Iranian population, for instance, living in poverty, this kind of authoritarian stability is quite fragile, okay? So this is one point, one dimension. The second dimension is the so-called stability of the regime in times of war. First of all, you cannot get rid of a regime, you cannot do regime change with an aerial campaign. It doesn't work like that, okay? In my view, it doesn't work like that. Iraq in 2003 was not only an area blitzkrieg at the very beginning, right, against an adversary, Saddam Hussein, that was super weakened, after, all that had happened in the 2 decades before. And then you had boots on the ground. There is no appetite whatsoever after the Iraq debacle in the United States for boots on the ground. There is no appetite for that, okay? And so this is why, militarily speaking, it is very unlikely that regime change is going to happen by aerial assault alone. And we're not going to see much more than that, okay? Yeah.
I'll take the short answer. Yeah. I have, we want to have half of the time for you for questions. I have one last one, and then we'll have the mic go around. So you can think of your questions, and you can make sure you look towards Tuha so you get her attention with the mic. But listen to me for the final question. And and we have another mic here over with Camilla. So can you now zoom out a little bit and explain to us Iran's geopolitical role, in particular its relationship with Russia and the way in which you have, on the one side, now the US and Israel, Russia, you have, of course, China. Europe's also there, even though I guess we don't really matter very much. Can you situate to us what for the world is important in this conflict?
For the world, we're going to see, Iranian attacks on the energy infrastructure are going to continue. Even in the event of the depletion of Iran's missile arsenal, also including, since the US and Israel are, targeting the missile infrastructure and the launches, right? But one single missile or one single Shahed drone can lead to havoc, okay? So I fear that this war is going to escalate. At the beginning of the war, we had, the price of oil was $70 per barrel. Last night, we had $109 per barrel. It could well go into $120 to $150 per barrel because of all of that, right? In terms of the main players beyond Israel, the United States, and Iran, we have obviously the Russians and the Chinese that were, misconceived as strategic partners of Iran, of the Islamic Republic. There are more precarious partners who, geopolitically speaking, have been, using and abusing the geopolitical weakness of the Islamic Republic on various fronts. Since the regime in Iran thought that there are outside guarantors of survival. Now, the Chinese are interested in stability in the Gulf because this is where they get, a bulk of their oil supplies from. Not only are they the most important buyer of Iranian oil, 80 to 90% of Iranian oil goes via shadow fleets to China, but most importantly, the UAE and Saudi Arabia, right? And then Africa, Angola, and so forth. So for the Chinese, it's a nightmare. Also, the Iranians actually sending missiles onto the energy infrastructure where the Chinese had invested billions of dollars. So they're quite pissed, actually. Okay, they want the war to end. Of course, the other dimension, there's also this argument they're quite happy because US military prowess is concentrated in the Persian Gulf. So they can go take Taiwan, okay? But this, the energy stuff is still important. Russia is a bit of a different manner. They don't want to lose their ally, the Islamic Republic of Iran, that has been also providing them with drones and missiles in their war against Ukraine. They don't want to lose it, geopolitically speaking, to the West. So those are long-standing. Also, if let's say if Iran becomes a different Iran, it would it would re-engage in it would become a major energy exporter, which would be to the detriment of Russian interests also vis-a-vis Europe, right? So, so this is why the Russians are providing the Iranians with intelligence about US military assets. For instance, the Iranians just a few days ago, they shot down a radar system of THAAD, which is the air defense system of the Americans based in Jordan, okay, which is a 300 million radar, whatever. So this is the kind of help that the Russians this time around, as opposed during the 12-day war last June between, you know, again, Israel and Iran and later the United States. This time around, they're, you know, helping a bit.
Okay, we'll stop here so we can take your questions. Raise your hand if you'd like to intervene. Rule of the game is identify yourself, short questions, no long comments, please, so we can take as many as possible. And yes, go ahead. If you grab it, then it's yours.
My name is Stan. I'm an independent journalist. I have a question about U.S. relationships in the region. There's been reporting on how the U.S. was reportedly trying to arm Kurdish fighters for them to intervene in Iran. The Kurdish region of Iraq replied by pointing out the betrayal of the first Trump administration against Kurdish forces by saying, "No, thank you, leave us out of it." You mentioned the UAE probably wished they had also been left out of this, and they probably wishing that the presence of U.S. assets in the region didn't make them such a big target. How costly is this going to be for U.S. strategic allies in the region? Do you think this is going to cost the U.S. some of those relationships?
Okay, those are different issues. I mean, I do understand what you mean, because I mean, both, you know, some Kurdish groups, not all of them, are, you know, some kind of U.S. allies, but the kind of relationship the United States has to GCC countries is on a wholly different level. I mean, on the Kurdish issue, you know, there was this Axios report saying that the Mossad had this plan of arming some kind of Iranian Kurdish forces in the KRG, that is northern Iraq, the Kurdish regional government, to go into Iran militarily. And they've been, you know, also the CIA was giving them weapons and so forth. Which is a total bullshit idea. Sorry for my French, but you know, for various reasons, because it would create a lot of chaos. Secondly, the balance of forces is totally, you know, I mean, a small Kurdish group against the IRGC. So at the end of the day, the Kurds, they're not stupid. They're quite, you know, smart. So they were understanding that they may end up as cannon fodder, you know, regardless of the strategic political aim of such an enterprise. By now we have statements from Rubio, from Trump, that such action will not, you know, take place. In terms of U.S. strategic relations with the Gulf, this is precisely what the Iranians or the Iranian regime is banking on, by targeting civilian and energy infrastructure in the Gulf, in Qatar, in Bahrain, in Kuwait, you know, Saudi Arabia, even Oman, so that those countries who are, you know, close partners of the United States, or also part of U.S. structures, military structures, CENTCOM, right? That they gonna, and also they have, you know, a special place in the heart of Trump. So they gonna, because of investments, because of money, and because of finance and so forth, they gonna lobby Trump to end the war. So this is the kind of calculation. Plus the fact the Iranian strategy aims at Western public opinion, so that Western societies, you know, called for the end of the war because of rising fuel prices. So this is the Iranian strategy. This is why they're going to continue. So chaos and instability is not a byproduct, it is part of the strategy. And yeah, I mean, how... So it's a tricky, it's a tricky situation, but for U.S., let's say, strategic interests, it could backfire. But then again, there are military and security considerations in terms of degrading Iranian military and power projection capabilities, most notably missiles, that are a threat to Israel mainly. Plus the fact we are not certain whether Trump eyes much more, perhaps a kind, again, Venezuela-style scenario, taking some of Iranian oil in the Gulf. So we have to see if this kind of imperial agenda is also something that we have to talk about more clearly.
Let's move to this side of the room, and whoever gets the mic can identify themselves and ask the question.
Hi, yes, my name is Kefi. I'm first year MIA. Thank you very much for your time and your lecture. Interesting your opinion about the transitional possibility of Pahlavi as opposed to what I saw was IRGC elected Khamenei's son, right? So really interesting to see about what this could look like as a traditional leadership versus long-term thing.
So, I mean, in terms of Khamenei, I mean, yeah, I mean, the irony of history is that Iranians for decades have been calling death to Khamenei, and now they have another Khamenei. So it's quite a, yeah. So, I mean, I don't have to explain to you, it's a great deal of continuity. He, like his dad, gonna rely on the most brutal repressive force you can imagine. He has a very close alliance with the IRGC, that is the Praetorian Guard of the political regime, and he has the same kind of geopolitical preferences as his dad has. So very much also looking into to the Kremlin in Moscow. So there's no change to be expected on that front. So also saying that, this means that the gulf between state and society and the structural problems and crises for which the Iranian regime is primarily responsible in terms of ecological crisis, the socioeconomic crisis, the political crisis, also the gender dimension, the 4 structural crises that I lay out in detail in the book as well, are going to persist. So this is not going to be, by no stretch of the imagination, this is going to change anything. The second question was pertaining to the former Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, who has emerged over the last few years, most notably, quite recently, as the most important opposition figure. And because of various reasons, because of the heavy repression that the Islamic Republic is exercising on potential opposition figures inside the country, whenever someone from the constituent elements of Iranian civil society emerges as a possible leader, be it the women's movement, the student movement, or the labor movement, they're going to be arrested or they're going to be killed. It's a revolutionary regime that is precisely looking at those people and they want to eliminate them. So hence organizing within Iran is extremely difficult but indispensable to change the balance of forces between state and society to the detriment of the latter. Okay? Now, Pahlavi has argued that he gonna lead the transition process after potential collapse, after the collapse of the Islamic Republic, into a secular democratic system, right? So this has been his argument. He has become quite popular with a lot of Iranians inside and outside the country. And then he has presented a plan, okay? If you look at it, and I'm currently studying it, it's quite problematic. So, I mean, first of all, he is referred to as the leader of the national uprising. I don't know who gave him this title, right? And then at every, within this process of, within this phase of transition, which involves, a new constituent assembly to work on a new constitution, right? At every single step, he has to sign off, okay? Which is not the most democratic of all options. So this is problematic. Also, the socioeconomic, since I did a PhD in development studies, I look at such stuff. It doesn't look good because one of the most prominent words is privatization, including most hospitals. Actually, they have replaced the document. So it's now 180 instead of 170, and I think in the new document, those words do not come up. I was just, doing a quick search. Anyways, privatization is not a bad idea. It's actually a good idea if you have a monopolistic capitalist structure like the one in Iran. Okay, you have actually monopolistic capitalist structures by the RGC economic empires, by the Khamenei clan, and so forth. So it's actually a good idea, but not necessarily during a transition phase where there is no popular mandate and no democratic legitimacy. Who do you want it to privatize to, right? So those are the problems, okay? So I'm, perhaps one of, most people do not look into those programs, okay? But then again, he has been able to present himself as a very popular figure because he has had a very democratic discourse over the years, right? But the problem is that he has not been able to push back against some of his ultra-nationalist supporters, okay? So, I mean, the bottom line is this discussion about Pahlavi is complex. It's multifaceted, okay? So whenever I talk about him, either the left or the right, want to slap me. But, so there's a lot of gray areas. But then again, I mean, first of all, and the bottom line is that he has become an inspirational leader. He has shown some kind of prowess of mobilization, both outside of the country. You see, for instance, during the Munich Security Conference, in all different, cities, in Toronto, LA, Vancouver, there have been 1 million people, 1 million Iranians taken to the streets, okay? Because also he was, he was calling for those demonstrations. And January 8th and 9th coincided with Pahlavi calling for Iranians inside of Iran taking to the main streets of their cities, of their respective cities. So this was, but you have to put yourself in the shoes of Iranians in Iran, okay? You don't have a political figure. Once there is a political figure that is somehow acknowledged by some in the West, but not all, okay? Trump doesn't, like him that much, or doesn't regard him. It's not his Venezuela style of scenario. This explains. So a lot of people are happy that he's around because he's there on the political and international political stage, right? But the problem is organizationally inside the country, he doesn't have this kind of network of organization that is indispensable, again, to change the balance of forces between state and society to the benefit of society.
Thank you. Let's move to the back of the room, more on the right this time, or if there is a question in the back of the room, I actually see all hands in the front. So maybe we'll go to the front first, and then we'll go to the other side again.
Hi, my name is Ace Chowdhury, first-year MPP. My question for you is, how do you explain the international double standard in which Iran, as an NPT member, is treated as an imminent nuclear threat, while Israel's undeclared but widely presumed illegal nuclear arsenal faces far less geopolitical pressure and scrutiny?
Thank you. I mean, first of all, in terms of, you have a point, of course, but just to add to that, first of all, international, legally speaking, Israel is not part of the NPT, okay? So, and then they have become a nuclear power, but they don't want to say it, but everyone knows they're a nuclear power. Okay, so this is one story. On the Iranian story is, although the Iranian government and state always says that they're within the confines of the NPT, this is not absolutely factual, because they have engaged in work that actually was, aimed at some kind of a weaponization of the program, a military dimension, something that the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, called, they name it something like unresolved issues from the past, okay? So this is still not resolved. So, and it's like year on, and so the thing is that whereas it is true that Iran has been subjected to a very robust IAEA, inspection regime, even before the breakup of the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, when actually the Iranians kicked out the senior inspectors and they turned off the cameras, of that inspection regime of their nuclear program. They were engaging in some kind of military-related nuclear work in military sites, and military sites are not part of IAEA inspection, right? So that's the issue. But then again, I think that the justification for the 12-day war, and also, I mean, this time around the justification was a bit different, but the 12-day war justification was that there was an imminent threat of a nuclearization. And I've said it, and I wrote it back then, this is not the fact. I mean, the Israelis used a damning IAEA report that was just published before the start of the 12-day war last June. And that report contained different dimensions. One of the dimensions was that the Iranians had assembled 400 kilograms of highly enriched uranium, 60% enriched uranium, which is a small qualitative step to weapons grade, 90%, okay? And this would theoretically suffice to build a few bombs. So this is why some people were concerned. Okay, but again, they would have to to pursue additional steps until building those bombs. Actually, so this was this justification was not solid from the Israelis. This time around, the Israelis have argued that there was an imminent threat in terms of Iran's missile infrastructure not, being so buried underground so that military action would not be able to take it out. Okay. On this, I'm not quite sure. I have to look into it into more detail to give you a more qualified answer.
Thank you. Over to Camilla, who may have already locked eyes with somebody.
Thank you. I'm Elena. I'm a second-year MIA student. This question is twofold. I'll make it short, but it's related to the previous discussion on Pahlavi and the regime type. How do you see? Can you elaborate a bit on how strong the conservatist elite still has a claim on Iran, and how realistic it is for the Pahlavi to enter into the scene? I'm wondering about, especially if we have different models in the Middle East on how these religious authorities can look. We have Saudi Arabia, where it's a monarchy. We have Egypt, where the ulama is still very much present, but in a secular model more so. What is a realistic future in your eyes for Iran, and where can they draw inspiration in terms of sort of reconciliating the more national, conservative, religious society with people that maybe look more towards democracy in a Western model?
Okay, I'm a bit confused, but okay. Not sure where the question was, but okay, there are different regime types, that's true. In different regime types within the Middle East, there are different, I mean, the clerical establishment has a different role, right? I mean, the issue about, the Iranian, the Islamic Republic, in my view, can be characterized and defined as a military clerical oligarchy. It has a theocratic mantle, so the revolutionary kind of Shia element is very important to it. But Iran is a de facto military dictatorship, okay? The RGC is the most important force, both militarily, in terms of security, intelligence, and also in terms of the economy, okay? So the Iranian regime, in terms of regime type, is a very peculiar one. You don't have it anywhere else in the world. Secondly, talking about Pahlavi, it's not necessarily, you have to understand that in terms of Iranian history, the longest standing institution is that of the monarchy. Republic It's just a, you know, it's an exception, historically speaking. This is why a lot of Iranians sympathize with the idea. And in this, you know, whole discussion, I mean, what Iranian society wants, and this is what I have laid down in my book, based on manifestos published by different parts of Iranian civil society, they want us to get rid of this regime once for all. Okay, this is clear. And they want to replace it with a secular democratic system with a huge portion of social justice, because there doesn't exist social justice in that system. Okay. Now, ideally, we have to, you know, reach a stage at which the Iranian society can decide on their own future. In the program that I mentioned earlier, Pahlavi, at the end of this transitional process is a kind of choice given to the Iranian people, a dichotomy between a kind of, you know, constitutional monarchy or a, you know, kind of parliamentary system. Also, it's, I don't know, also problematic. Why would you only, you know, provide two choices? Anyways, but yeah, maybe, yeah, I'm going to stop here.
So you were not going to talk about the hereditary republic that we're now seeing, which is
yeah, I mean, which runs counter to the dominant political culture of the Islamic Republic. Do not forget that Khomeini in 1979 was labeling hereditary ruling systems as un-Islamic. Yeah. So this is why it's kind of a weird constellation now. It's the same kind of dynastical rule. But it has been facilitated by the kind of regime propaganda in Iran over the last few years, which had elevated Ali Khamenei to an imam-like, a prophet-like figure, the Imam Ali of our times, not me, but you know, like the Shia stuff. Okay, so this was the kind of detour of the regime. So he has this kind of, you know, religious, or not religious, but like holy mantle to him, plus the fact that he's now considered kind of a living martyr after his parents were killed, and probably, I don't know, his wife as well. So he's also using this kind of martyrdom in Shia theology. Or the regime is using that. But the funny thing is that no one has ever heard his voice. He has never given a public speech. You know, last night I was watching Iranian TV. This is what I do. And this was funny because they had a new supreme leader, but he was not even giving a speech. So it was just, you know, a poster. And reportedly he's also injured, so I don't know. And then again, he's going, I mean, he's on the hit list now. So maybe his reign is going, I mean, as my dear colleague Karim Sajjad from Carnegie in DC says, or puts it, I mean, Khamenei was there for 37 years and maybe he's not going to be there for 37 days.
I have a mic and somebody just in front of me, so I'll give my mic to you, and then we'll go back into the back of the room.
Thank you. I'm Simon Widmer. I'm a journalist with Tagesanzeiger from Switzerland.
Which one?
Tagesanzeiger, Switzerland. Yeah, my question is very simple. You said quite in the beginning that you feel that this is not going to end well. So what is the most likely scenario for this to end?
I mean, a lot of scenarios, but I think it's I mean, it could, you know, turn out this or that way. So I have no certainty whatsoever. But from what we have, you know, from the indications that we have so far, we might end in the Iranian case after the war ends, and who knows when it will end, with a weakened Iranian regime. Okay. That is somehow militarily crippled, that is economically crippled, but that is still around, which may re-engage another great massacre against its own people. We may see the continuation of Israeli degradation strikes further down. So the Iranian regime is going to rebuild the missile arsenal. Israel going to strike it. They're going to rebuild. They're going to strike it. Okay, so kind of perpetual, or to quote Trump's ambition to against forever war, but this kind of perennial unstable situation. And the big question is how the economic crisis is going to affect regime stability and also state society, the balance of forces between the two. I've been arguing that the economic crisis is the Achilles heel of the regime, because it could undermine the regime's ability to pay for the security apparatus. There are reports that this has already started to happen after the January protests. So after that, I think we're going to see a much more isolated Islamic Republic. Hopefully, we're going to see the maximum pressure upon the Iranian regime from the West and all others in terms of economic, financial, political, diplomatic pressure. I very much agree with Navid Kermani, whom some of you may know, who is a very prominent public intellectual in this country, who has argued in his piece for Süddeutsche Zeitung in early February, nach dem Massaker, after the massacre, that this regime has to be treated like the Nazi regime and like apartheid South Africa. And then, so maybe we're going to see the same kinds of conditions that allowed for the rapid collapse of the Assad regime in December 24. There was a combination of majorly two aspects. One was the popular disillusionment by large parts of society that everything going to be better than the Assad regime. Secondly, the armed forces were not paid, so they opted not to fight at all, right? So even you had an armed uprising against Assad, but actually there was virtually no fighting, okay, because of those structural elements that were in place. So maybe we're going to end up in this kind of situation, but the Iranian additional dimension is the kind of religious or kind of ideological element to it. The regime's social base is 10 to 15% of the population. So, I'm always frustrated by Western media. Every time something happens in Iran, every time they ask you, oh, it seems Iranians are divided. And every time you have to explain to you, yeah, well, it's not a division like 50-50, it's like more 10 to 15% to 80 to 85%, right? The 10 to 15% who are considered to be the social base, half of them are ideologically committed. The other ones are those who are opportunistic, benefactors politically and economically. And then we have entered hyperinflation in Iran, okay? We had, last autumn, we had 60% officially, which hyperinflation by definition is from 50% onwards. So we had 60%. Now we have 100%. Officially, unofficially is probably double that number, okay? Because forget official numbers from autocratic regime. It's totally manufactured. It doesn't make any sense. Look up Iranian, for instance, unemployment rate on Google or whatever, or Wikipedia. You're going to see, oh, it's quite low. Well, it's quite low if you do not know how they calculate unemployment. If you work 1 hour per week, you are considered not to be unemployed. 1 hour per week. So it's totally bogus. So it doesn't reflect social reality. So, and all those international organizations that you are studying, they take official numbers. They don't send people inside of Iran. They don't do household surveys there, right? So, Iranian population going to be very poor. And I fear if the war escalates and if the American-Israeli strikes are not only against military and repressive sides, which I think not many should have qualms with, if this is the case, but if they also include state-relevant, infrastructure, energy infrastructure, the post-war regime will even more forcefully spend the money that Iran has on rebuilding those, whatever they have to rebuild. I mean, regardless of war, the priority of the budget was always towards the so-called, what I call the Trinity, which is the clerical commercial complex, the repressive, the security military, and the propaganda organizations. Okay, so this is where the bulk of the money always goes to. If you look at all the budgets of the state budgets. The state before the start of the war was in miserable shape. It was, it was partly a failing state. There was a water crisis. There was an electricity crisis. But then again, I'm hopeful because I know of the resilience of the Iranian people. I know that they're very courageous people. I know that they've surely, I mean, they've risked a lot. I mean, every single protester that goes on the streets in Iran, they know they're going to be shot in the eye, or I mean, at best. Okay, so I mean, because of the structural, because of the sociological situation in Iran, I think that the situation is not sustainable, regardless of what happens with or without war. So I hope, but this time around, I think the international support dimension is absolutely indispensable. You cannot argue that, no, let's leave them alone, so no, we're not going to do anything. No, it's not going to, work in that fashion. They need outside support, and they need tremendous pressure on their regime in order to change the balance of forces to their advantage.
Thank you. Tuha in the back.
Hey, thank you so much. I'm Jonas. I'm a second-year MIA student. Let's say it's February 27th, and you had the opportunity to call Donald Trump for 1 minute. What would you have told him? And you have a second call with him tonight, 1 minute. What are you going to tell him?
I give you 2 minutes, but same question.
I'm not, actually, I was on Swiss TV last week, and they asked me the same thing, which I mean, I hate those questions. But no, listen, I mean, okay, I should not use bad words here. So anyways, listen, everyone, I mean, it's not about Trump only, the kind of diplomatic rounds that didn't work out, it's basically everyone has its own responsibilities why we have ended in the war. The same was true with the 12-day war, okay? The Islamic Republic was not ready for concessions. Okay, it's, why did it start? Because the, diplomacy failed, right? Why did diplomacy fail? Because we're talking about 3 main areas. We're not talking about human rights, okay? We're talking about 3 main areas in security policy, which is Iran's nuclear program, Iran's ballistic missile program, and Iran's support for regional proxies, okay? The Iranians wanted to focus the diplomacy only on the nuclear issue because they didn't want to talk about the other stuff, okay? The Americans this time around, as opposed to prior American administrations, they learned somehow, I mean, and they understood, okay, we have to talk about more stuff. The Iranian state, the Iranian regime was not willing to concede on any of those fronts because they regard each of these policies and programs to be their kind of regime interest, okay? They need it for regime power projection, they need it for, so this is their interest. And it runs counter to the Iranians' national interest. Because the Iranians have nothing, they don't benefit from the nuclear program. They lose. I mean, the nuclear program was $1 trillion. I mean, a huge amount of money was lost. outside pressure was invited. Huge political and social costs, and no one in Iran is really, beyond some people among the regime supporters, is supporting this kind of idea that, what Iranian officials always tell to the press, no, it's our inalienable right. Come on, what about looking for the inalienable right of your own citizens, Or the same is true with the ballistic missile program, Imagine a regime that has chanted death to America, death to Israel, for 47 years now. You don't think that is going to have consequences? It is going to have consequences, And also the kind of regional militias. Was it for the liberation of Palestine that Iran did support Hamas? Who would think that? Even the Palestinians do not think that, okay? Is Hezbollah always acting on the basis of Lebanese national interests? Perhaps no, because they're fully financed by Tehran. So we have to look at the reality, and the reality is really, it's really bad. The reality is that we have this kind of discursive level that all, sounds nice and noble, it's against imperialism and against Palestine. No, it's about criminal regimes that are oligarchs. Okay, so yeah.
Yeah, but I'm a simplistic US president, and you just have one short sentence message to give to me. I think your answer was good for this audience, but what's your message?
No one is, Trump is not, neither is he listening to someone, nor is he listening to himself. So that's the truth. The problem is, no, No, I'm not going to. I don't know. If I come up with something smart.
I sense that he thinks it would have been a lost cause, so we'll take that answer too. Camilla, over to you, who you would like to hand the mic to.
Hi, I'm Peter. I'm a second-year student here at the Hertie School, and I would also like to look on Trump and the very near future of this war, because I'm quite sure that Trump wants to end this war before the midterms, but I'm wondering. You were also talking about he has no strategy. That's very clear, and he's probably looking for some kind of deal. So what could this deal look like? What could he sell to the American people that looks like a success for him now?
Yeah, very good. No, he could. Trump could sell whatever as gold, huh? He's a showman, right? So this is what you're supposed to do. So he could easily do that. He could argue, according to what American officials say, according to what, a few days ago, Heath, the Secretary of War, has said during the press conference, which has been reiterated by different top US officials, is that the main US aim is to, to destroy the military infrastructure, the missile infrastructure, right? And the Iranian Navy. So basically military and power projection capabilities. If the US and Israel are going to continue to do that, they're going to be able to proclaim such a victory, right? So they could do that. So I think, some kind of an, exit would be possible if the Iranians also play the game. If they continue to shoot, last Saturday, Pezeshkian, the Iranian president, was coming out. He was like, apologizing to our Arab brothers. We're not going to shoot you. And then I was watching Al Jazeera. And then 2 minutes later, Iranian missiles are flying over Doha. We intercepted them. And then Mohseni Ejei, who is also of that interim, he was like, no, we're going to continue to launch missiles. Pezeshkian was then apologizing for his apology. So it's, because it's, so they have to be, we can reach that point. I'm not saying that we're not going to reach that point, but Trump Trump going to be the main decider here. He has, obviously, there are points of pressure via the US economy, via, domestic politics in the United States, via the GCC. So he's going to, he could do that, and this would be an erstwhile end to the war, but not a sustainable end to the war, because as long as the main structural constellation is here. We're going to have the repetition of this, also, when the Islamic Republic continues this kind of policies, we're going to have the same kind of scenario again and again, maybe.
Let me send Tuha through the middle so that the middle aisle is not the bad. Come towards me, or okay, somebody in the back, but then we'll take another one from the middle of the room. You almost got the mic, so that it's not a bad location.
Thank you. My name is Marcel Mattei. I'm a first-year MDS student. I wanted to ask a kind of twofold question. You mentioned that the IRGC, Basij, other regime military assets might degrade if there is no income to pay them with. Would that kind of degradation open any avenue for any internal, so to speak, boots-on-the-ground situations, such as Reza Pahlavi's repeated calls to the regular army to protect citizens?
I mean, those calls never came to fruition. I mean, Pahlavi, for many years, he said, no, we have a database and people can, we have, I don't know, 50,000 people from the armed forces who have, declared they're going to defect. I mean, there is no evidence whatsoever for that. Also, it seems that the machinery of repression and this lethal machinery of repression is still working. But you're right, what we need for change in Iran is not only organization of civil society, but also its rifts within the power elite and the repressive apparatus. Those rifts could come as a consequence of non-payment of salaries, although you have a lot of people also who are very ideologically committed, but then perhaps the numbers won't suffice if some other important elements of the RGC are demoralized. Then we have a parallel military structure. We have the Artesh, which is the National Army of Iran, which has been, I mean, the top people are RGC people. So we don't know, the rank and file is less ideological than the RGC and the Basij paramilitary force. Then again, within the RGC, I mean, the RGC is not a monolith either. There is a socio-economic rift within the RGC between an oligarchic, top level of commanders who are basically looking for their economic empires, and the rank and file who are also affected by those high inflation and so forth, despite their privileges, okay? Yeah, I mean, Pahlavi's, I mean, no, I don't believe that he's going to be, I mean, going to, step foot into Iran and do something. I don't believe this kind of scenario. So I think it has, I mean, change in Iran has to come as a consequence of domestic and international developments. Domestic, what I just outlined, international, what I outlined earlier in terms of pressure.
We're coming to the end, so if you want to absolutely have the final question, wave both hands and make sure we see you first.
Come over there.
Or walk up after us. You get the final question.
Yep. My name is Mehran Daulatgha. I'm from the University of Leipzig. I'm an Iranian citizen, hence I'm here. My question is, how do you see the role of characters like Larijani, Alibaf, or Ejei in a scenario where Mojtaba Khamenei is assassinated, which is very likely given the war going on? And how likely do you see like a moderate Rouhani gaining power in the current situation?
I mean, as you know, and as we Iranians know, there are no real moderates in the Iranian system. This is the kind of Western definition. I mean, all of them. I mean, I've said it, over the weekend. So all of them are the same, basically. Okay. So it's a policy tool of German foreign policy, of European foreign policy, to identify someone as moderate, to legitimize engagement with them. Okay. So this is. For the Iranian people, they're all the same. They've been part and parcel of this criminal regime from a very long time. You know that, right? So, but to your question, I mean, absolutely, he could be assassinated. And maybe he's not going to be the main figure, after all. I mean, his dad was, because he was, elevating his standing over the years and close alliance with the RGC. But Mojtaba doesn't have the same of charisma. He doesn't have the same, he's not comparable to his dad, basically, okay? So maybe there are more powerful figures inside the system, although he's been a very powerful figure, because the funny thing about the Iranian system is that, you know, the regime, you know, I don't use it as a political term, I use it, you know, you define the regime as a combination of semi-state and state entities, okay? You have a formal state institutions in Iran, and you have a parallel structure. The parallel structure is partly the IRGC empire and partly the bonyads, the clerical commercial complex, the so-called religious foundations, but they're basically economic empires. And then you have the Beit Rahbari, which is the institution of the supreme leader. That is a parallel government who gets a lot of money, but with no accountability. All of those that I mentioned don't have accountability, don't pay taxes. But they're very powerful, very rich, and politically influential. So Mojtaba has been running the show, among others, and you know, in the background. I mean, there was reports over the last few weeks and months in the Financial Times that Mojtaba Khamenei was controlling the economic empire, and they were buying luxurious properties in London, the Hilton Hotel in Frankfurt. It's part of the Iran. The Iranian regime owns it. Kitzbühel, you know, all those ski resorts. So it's crazy shit, you know. Anyways, so he's a powerful figure, but there may be more powerful figures than him. Ali Larijani, who is now the old new secretary of the Supreme National Security Council, the former nuclear negotiator, someone who is also mislabeled to be, you know, a moderate. Then who has an IRGC background. You have Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, and Larijani is according to what we know, is that he runs political affairs now, and military affairs is run by Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, who is the former IRGC air commander, Air Force commander. He is the Speaker of Parliament. He is a billionaire. Larijani has two brothers, by the way, two clerics, also very powerful family, okay? Then you have Rouhani, who was, you know, lauded here in the West as to be like the reformist because he was shaking hands with our politicians and forging the nuclear deal, right? So he was a good guy. Although he was a representative of Khamenei in the Supreme National Security Council for 20 years. He was, although he has a different idea about how things should work, he wants to, you know, get better relations with the West in order to reduce economic pressure, in order to stabilize the regime. So the tactics may differ from some of those figures that you mentioned, but the aim going to be the same. So they want to keep the regime at bay. The bottom line is that imagine we're going to see the Venezuela scenario playing out. So you're going to have someone within the Iranian system who tells Trump, okay, listen, we're going to give you the concessions that you like. And then Trump going to be, you know, fine. And, you know, but the difficulty is he has to sell it to the hardline constituency. Okay? And this is going to be a hard sell for everyone in the Iranian system. It's not impossible because, after all, the Iranian regime is looking after its own interest. You know, they don't care what happens. Okay, they're going to massacre tens of thousands of people. They're going to again massacre tens of thousands of people. They don't really care. So yeah, maybe we're going to see such a scenario, but there are also difficulties.
So we're coming to the end of our time. Let me close by thanking the CMEG and the Hertie School staff here, in particular the comms team, for all
It's pronounced CMEG.
CMEG, sorry. CMEG and the Hertie School for supporting tonight's event. Let me thank Ali Fathollah-Nejad for this very bleak tour de force, and check out his book if you read German in the back, and wait around if you want it signed. And maybe a closing word for Iranian society, who I believe all of us in the room wish freedom and peace.
Thank you.
Thank you.